So, hi everybody. My name is Joss. I'm with LGBT Alliance USA. So I'm like really excited to be participating in this event today. We have the Coalition for Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act. This is a group of organizations: the Feminist and Struggle (FIST), the Georgia Green Party, XX Amazons, and LGBT Alliance USA are all members. Please know that this is being recorded. This is going to be displayed also publicly. So as you've heard a few times, we are asking you to disable your video option and mute yourself. Please type all questions into the written chat, and then we'll go through and hit those questions one by one. But please do mute yourself, stay muted, and disable your video. So let's begin with Anne Minash. She is a radical feminist, socialist, and grassroots political organizer who is a founding member of Feminist and Struggle. She has worked for many decades as a civil rights lawyer for people with disabilities and for others subjected to discrimination, poverty, homelessness, and police abuse due to their race and/or sex. She is a co-author of the Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act. All right, Anne.
All right. Well, this is exciting. I'm really honored today to be here representing FIST, Feminist and Struggle, and the newly formed Coalition for the Feminist Amendments. And we have an acronym already, COFA. And to be in front of a crowd of 144 people and counting is really exciting. The coalition brings together, as Josh said, FIST, the LGBT Alliance, XX Amazons, the Georgia Green Party, and many others who are committed to organizing, to lobby, and advocate for the feminist amendments to the Equality Act. And as witnessed by this impressive interest and turnout today, our movement is growing. My one regret is I wish we could all be together in person. That was FIST's original idea. When we did the Equality Act, we'd start having some public forums. I would have rather be in person rather than in cyberspace, but here we are. Feminists and male allies have many challenges ahead of us, the least of which is organizing during a worldwide pandemic. In the US, we are faced with two powerful enemies of women's liberation: the dual faces of backlash against the gains of the second wave, that of transgender ideology, which would erase us, and that of the Christian right that would enslave us. But I really believe that we can do this. In unity, there is strength. We can and will defend and advance the sex-based rights of women and girls, defeat the backlash, and move us forward once again toward the liberation of our sex. I want to start talking about the Equality Act, which is why we're here. The Equality Act that has passed the House this session and is currently pending in the US Senate is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the Equality Act would provide long overdue federal statutory protections based on sexual orientation. And this is particularly important to those of us who are lesbians and still face job and housing discrimination based on who we love. The Equality Act also removes the statutory basis for using religious freedom claims to challenge civil rights obligations. This is not a small issue, and I think feminists need to start paying attention to it. There is a case right now pending before the US Supreme Court called Fulton versus City of Philadelphia. It involves a foster care agency, Catholic Charities, that receives city funding, government funding, but despite getting money from the government, claims the right on religious grounds to discriminate against same-sex couples in its placement of foster children. So that's really serious, and that's a good thing in the Equality Act, that it would prevent, it would weaken the ability for groups like Catholic Charities to discriminate. So on the one hand, we have those good things. On the other hand, the Equality Act as presently written poses a clear and present danger to the female sex. It does this in two ways. One, by including the subjective category of gender identity as a form of sex discrimination. Basically a protected subclass under civil rights laws. And it also includes it in the bill's definition of sex itself. And the practical implications of this means that gender identity will subsume and override sex as a protective class. That's a real danger inherent in the language being used. The second part of the danger is it explicitly outlaws female-only spaces, thereby allowing access to males based on gender identity. Ending female-only spaces and programs threatens the privacy and safety of all women and girls in the face of persistent and pervasive male pattern violence. It also outlaws the ability to measure disparities between the sexes, such as the so-called gender pay gap, the fact that women still get paid a lot less than men. And it prohibits the sex-conscious remedies needed to advance women in society and end male supremacy. It basically imposes a sex blindness, which, like a race blindness, actually is an impediment to addressing systemic bigotry, systemic discrimination. Moreover, the disappearing of sex undermines the rights of lesbians, bisexuals, and gay men, as sexual orientation becomes meaningless if sex is deemed to no longer exist. While the Equality Act has been pending, the courts have already moved in this same dangerous direction, as Equality Act does. The US Supreme Court in Bostic, which is a Title VII employment case, found that discrimination based on an undefined quote unquote transgender status was in part based on sex. Though Justice Gorsuch's ruling was narrow and he still used sex in its normal meaning, meaning sex being sex, this didn't prevent the lower courts from taking a little bit in there and running with it and erasing sex entirely. Within weeks following Bostic, two appellate courts, the 11th Circuit and the 4th Circuit, ruled in virtually identical Title IX cases that a girl who identified as a boy was discriminated against based on sex for being denied access to a boys' bathroom. And this is despite the fact that Title IX regulations explicitly allow for separate facilities based on sex. So clearly, placing female erasure into a federal statute, as the Equality Act would, in its current form, would make a bad situation worse and be disastrous for women. Now, the Equality Act has no chance to get through while Trump remains in office and can exercise his veto. But President-elect Biden has promised that he will do all in his power to push this bill through in the first 100 days of his presidency. So the time to begin organizing is now. We can't wait. And that's what our coalition has decided. We cannot wait. When faced with a bill that has both positives and negatives for women, Feminist in Struggle came to the conclusion that feminists should call for amending the bill rather than rejecting it outright. So last year, 3 lawyers, including myself, got together and engaged in a very lengthy process of rewriting the Equality Act. The results, which we dubbed the Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act, was further amended and approved through our democratic process in Feminist in Struggle. We have a body that are all our active members, and they voted and amended it multiple times to get to the document that we have today. Now, what do the Feminist Amendments do? 1, they end the tendency to conflate sex with gender identity. This is really important. They do that by removing gender identity as a protected class and establishing only two, new separate categories distinct from sex in federal civil rights law: sexual orientation and sex stereotyping. The second thing we do is we define our terms. Not defining terms can be a disaster. We define sex, as genes, gonads, and the gametes that an individual's body is configured to produce, determined at fertilization and observed and recorded at birth. We also state explicitly that sex cannot be changed. We also define females, women, girls as sex, and males, men, boys as sex. We've reclaimed the language that we need to reclaim as women. We also define sex stereotyping as, quote, notions of proper behaviors, appearances, mannerisms, dress, and grooming socially imposed on males and females respectively. And we also spell out, and this is very important, that sex stereotyping does not include merely referring to someone's sex. So misgendering is no longer an issue, becomes a meaningless concept. Third, what does the feminist amendments do? We add robust findings on the continuing subordinate status of women based on sex, including the pervasive nature of male-patterned violence, the denial of our bodily sovereignty and control of our reproduction, and the continued discrimination based on sex that we experience as women in employment, education, and all areas of life, problems that are best addressed in many circumstances by female-only spaces and programs. We spell that out, because this is necessary for equality. Fourth, we explicitly state in rules of construction, which is how we're asking any court to construct or construe what we've written, that nothing in the bill under either sex stereotyping protections shall prohibit the classification of persons based on sex, or prohibit employers, schools, public accommodations from establishing or utilizing female-only facilities, programs, or services. And we spell out that with some examples, including multi-stall toilets, locker rooms, changing rooms, communal showers, battered women's shelters, rape crisis centers, jail cells, etc. We also state explicitly that the bill may not be interpreted to prohibit female-only programs, services, and activities whose purpose is to advance the status of women and girls and ensure their well-being and opportunity for development. This would include sports programs, women's scholarships, political and cultural programs, training or job programs, which is also known as affirmative action or set-asides, to bring women into fields and into leadership positions to which they have been previously excluded or underrepresented. In other words, under the feminist amendments to the Equality Act, no male, whether they call themselves transgender or not, whether they see themselves as a woman or not, could successfully sue and claim that female-only spaces and programs and services discriminated against them based either on sex or sex stereotyping. I'm now going to deal with the elephant in the room, transgender. Now, we did choose to use the word transgender very carefully in the feminist amendments. We do it, first of all, we define it very clearly. We define people who call themselves transgender as a subtype of people who do not conform to stereotypes for their sex and who have adopted a belief system, which I would describe as quasi-religious, though we don't really say that, but that puts them in conflict with or causes them to deny the sex of their bodies. Now, as radical feminists who wish to abolish gender completely, abolish the hierarchical system of gender that oppresses women and puts everyone in boxes, FIST members wholeheartedly reject this sexist belief system. And we deny and do not believe that socially prescribed sex roles are innate. We think they're social constructions and they're part of the oppression of women. We reject the idea that one's body can be wrong and needs to be fixed to match one's so-called gender identity. We urge changes in society, not in our bodies. We believe, and it's not even a belief, we know that sex is a real material reality and women are oppressed by patriarchal society based on our sex, regardless of our so-called identity. We have made it clear in the text of the feminist amendments that males cannot self-ID themselves into women's spaces and programs with or without cosmetic medical interventions such as cross-sex hormones and surgeries. The Feminist Amendments does not treat transgender individuals as a protected class or subclass, and that they are given no greater rights than anyone else who does not conform to sex role stereotypes. In other words, the Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act basically pares transgenderism down to size and has rendered it harmless, at least with respect to women's sex-based rights under federal civil rights laws. So why do we use this word at all? There's two reasons. One, we believe that ignoring the existence of non-conforming people who have accepted this belief system, as regressive as it is, by refusing to name them, will make it harder, not easier, to make sure that they can no longer infringe on the rights of women and girls as a sex. And second, we think that people who see themselves as transgender, who have embraced this ideology, should have no less rights than others who do not conform to sex stereotypes, but who wish to, reject this ideology. The transgender male who called himself Amy Stevens should not have been fired from his job at Harris Funeral Homes. Feminists should support the basic human rights of everyone. The Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act were written in the same spirit as J.K. Rowling when she asserted the right of every person, including those who call themselves transgender, to, quote, dress as you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, unquote. That's the message that needs to be incorporated into this fight. I want to end with a message of hope in these dark times. I believe strongly that we can win this struggle the same way we won the vote, the same way we won legal abortion, and we'll have to fight again on that issue, the same way we've gotten to the brink of winning the Equal Rights Amendment and or taking it to the brink of winning it, and the way we need to go to finish the job, by building our own independent grassroots feminist movement and by forging unity in action. And unity in action means we don't have to agree on 100%, but we need to be able to come together to fight together. We're not the only women who have fought against what seem to be insurmountable odds. And I think we can find inspiration in the words of one of our foremothers, Christabel Pankhurst, who said over a century ago, "Remember the dignity of your womanhood. Do not appeal, do not beg, do not grovel. Take courage, join hands, stand beside us, fight with us." Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Anne. And I want to make sure we're going to do questions at the end, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm seeing some really good questions come through. So if you can please hold those questions, because there's a lot of things going on in the chat, and I don't want to lose these questions. So Feminist in Struggle, in particular, if you want to PM questions to her, but also if you save them towards the end so that we don't miss anything that's being, because these are really good questions that are coming up. So we want to make sure we address them all. All right, so now we're going to go to Tina Minkowitz, who works in international human rights, focusing primarily on the rights of persons with disabilities. She is a lesbian feminist and author of the paper Female Autonomy versus Gender Identity, a critical analysis of gender identity in CEDAW, jurisprudence, and the Yogyakarta principles, which she submitted successfully for an LLM degree in 2016. She is a co-author of the Feminist Amendments. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you. And I think Carol was going to be sharing my PowerPoint on screen, if that's possible, because I wasn't able to do it. But if not, I will just.
Yes, I'll share it right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Can you make it in the slideshow?
Oh, let me see.
That's right. I don't know if you can.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. From beginning. Okay, so I've titled this Sex Stereotyping, How the Feminist Amendments Address Gender. And then when that comes, you can advance the slide
Yeah, let's see. How do I do that?
if that will work.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how I move that.
Seems to be.
See, I'm a share, I guess. Wait a minute.
Okay, well, maybe I'll just start reading the first slide when you can get that first.
Let me
That's
just
it. Okay, let's go there then.
Okay.
So forget the slideshow if
Yeah,
it's
I think
too
it's
hard.
easier to do it this way.
Okay, so sex stereotyping and sex discrimination. I'm just going to say that I want to focus on how we deal with sex stereotyping in the feminist amendments, because I see that as really the crux of presenting a feminist alternative that not only supports sexual orientation and the doing away of that religious loophole for discrimination that's in the Equality Act now, but also puts forward a way to support the rights of transgender people to non-discrimination, as Anne had said. And I think that's crucial to offering a feminist alternative, as opposed to just saying, well, the Equality Act is just too bad. Nobody's going to get their human rights because there's this conflict. And so we're trying to put forward a way of women having our rights as a sex. And part of feminism has also always been to oppose sex roles, to oppose sex stereotypes. So, and transgender people can be protected against discrimination there. So the sex stereotyping as part of sex discrimination came into US law through the Supreme Court case Price Waterhouse v. Hopkins. It's a very interesting case to read. I certainly identified with the plaintiff in that case, a woman who was very good at her job, and the men who were her supervisors and co-workers essentially just saw her as being aggressive and unfeminine because she was doing things the same way that if a man had been doing them, he would have been promoted and praised all of the time. The thing is that they only said that it can be evidence of a discriminatory motive of sex discrimination. The Equality Act, as passed by the House of Representatives in 2019, maybe this year as well, includes a sex stereotype as part of the definition of sex. Now, that could be widening protection by treating sex stereotyping as a variety of sex discrimination and not only evidence. But as Anne has said, and as we all know here, the Equality Act has this really problematic thing for women of protecting gender identity as such in a way that undermines the rights of women as a sex. So the feminist amendments separate out sex stereotyping along with sexual orientation as separate grounds of discrimination. And we put it in a kind of verbal form, sex stereotyping, because it's not that a sex stereotype is exactly what we're protecting. We're protecting everyone against sex stereotyping. And we see them as these two grounds as actually both being linked to sex, but they relate to this dimension of sexism or sex discrimination that feminists always argue has harmed both sexes. So sex discrimination, patriarchy, male supremacy is a system of male oppression of females, male subjugation of females. But there's always been a dimension of that is placing the sexes in roles contrary to one another. And so you see that men can feel that they're harmed by feeling like they're not supposed to cry and that sort of thing. And so I think it's appropriate to see it as linked to sex, but to also separate it out for that reason. And this approach has some support, I would say, in international law. CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Article 5A directs all countries who ratify that treaty to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct in men and women with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and customary and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority or of the superiority of either of the sexes, or on stereotyped roles for men and women. So without getting into a whole lot about CEDAW, it puts sex stereotyping in there, and that's the only provision under CEDAW in which men are addressed as having something where they are benefiting from that convention. I'm going to ask to advance the slide. I'm also going to turn a light on here. Okay, let's hope that's okay. All right, so let's advance the slide, please. So I've put the whole definition of sex stereotyping there, and it's actually too hard to read, I see, the way the slide is. I'm just going to read a few parts I had highlighted. So it's the use of sex stereotypes in determinations made about an individual or other discrimination based on an individual's nonconformity with sex stereotypes. We're bringing in explicitly the nonconformity. We say it's particularly harmful to women, girls, but it can also be restrictive to men and boys and discriminatory towards lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, and transgender people who don't conform or may reject the stereotypes assigned to their sex. Now, in sub A there, we say sex stereotyping includes the expectation that individuals will manifest behaviors, appearance, dress, grooming, interests, and personality stereotypically associated with their sex and refrain from manifesting those associated with the other sex. And transgender people, as well as some other gender nonconforming people, may not only, they might reject any kind of sex stereotype, but they also might see something that's been assigned to the other sex and say, gee, I really like that. I think I'm going to do that one. And that positive identification is protected equally with the right to just reject anything that's been put on your own sex. And we say explicitly that discrimination based on a person's nonconformity with such expectations constitutes sex stereotyping discrimination. And as Anne said, it doesn't include referring to or classifying by somebody by sex for legitimate reasons consistent with this act. So if somebody's just being obnoxious and exercising a harassment against a person, which can happen to butch lesbians as well, that somebody saying, oh, you know, prove it to me that you're really a woman, that is sex stereotyping, not protected, because it's not a legitimate reason consistent with this act, but merely identifying to say, I'm sorry, you know, you're male and you cannot be in this women's only space, to someone who is in fact male, you know, that you know for a fact is male, then that's not sex stereotyping. Next slide, please.
Carol, if you, I'm seeing in chat here, if you click enable editing, you'll be able to do it as a slideshow.
I've been trying to do that, but
it's not working.
It's okay.
Okay.
This is the last
Oh, this is the last slide.
Okay.
This last slide now. Okay, so
I couldn't get
as I said, I see the sex stereotyping provision as key to the feminist amendments to explain what we mean when we say we're pro-women, pro-lesbian, pro-gay, and we support the human rights of transgender people, their rights to basic non-discrimination. And that there's the limit to that is that sex is also a legitimate ground of discrimination and women's protection can't be compromised. So transgender people are protected against discrimination as one category among others who do not conform to the expectations placed on their sex. As Anne said, the feminist amendments, the way the Equality Act is structured is modifying the provisions throughout US civil rights law, throughout the various titles and the various parts of legislation that make up US civil rights law. So sex stereotyping and sexual orientation would be included everywhere that, you know, all of the grounds now in civil rights law are included. So sex as well as race, and it escapes my mind right now all of the categories protected. Sex itself is not a stereotype. This approach would be consistent with the result in the Bostock case, that Amy Stevens would not be fired just for declaring an intent to live as a woman. It would remain to be seen what Amy Stevens meant by that. So, but merely by saying that you intend to live as a particular sex that is not what you are biologically, that would not be cause for firing someone. And our approach would protect the integrity of women's and girls' sports, the ability to maintain single-sex public accommodations for women, to hire female personnel exclusively for intimate functions like body searches and personal care. And that's pretty much what I have to say. To me, this is the most important bit in the feminist amendments that can clarify what we think is a feminist approach that's not an anti-transgender approach, that this is how we understand that we can balance the rights appropriately. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Tina. So now we're going to hear from Callie Burt. Callie is an associate professor of criminology at Georgia State University in the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies. In addition to her other interests, Callie has a longstanding research interest in sex differences and how these differences are shaped by gender as a social force, and the ways in which law and social policies reflect, reinscribe, or challenge these differences. Her research has been published in various outlets, including the American Journal of Sociology, American Sociological Review, Criminology, Feminist Criminology, and she's published op-eds about issues related to sexism and violence against women.
You're fading out some, Joss.
Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's better.
Let's see. So she's published op-eds about issues related to sexism and violence against women in outlets such as the Seattle Times. Callie recently moved to Georgia State University from the University of Washington. She was the recipient of the Young Scholar Award from the American Society of Criminology in 2014. Welcome, Callie.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
So I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I enjoyed everything that has been discussed so far, and I look forward to our discussions. So I'm usually used to doing a much more formalized presentation where I have some results that I present and I cover them. And so this is a little bit more off the cuff, and I wasn't quite sure what I should discuss. And I had a question about how I got into this topic and how I arrived at some of the same ideas and some very similar, albeit a little bit different conclusions, but with the same gist that the organized women's groups have come to. So to the first, I guess I've always been a little bit confused about the increasing LGBTQIAS+ alphabet that was growing, but I understood the purpose of this alliance to be, sorry? Oh, I understand the purpose of this alliance to be really allowing people to live as they wanted to live and present how they are and be who they are as long as they were consenting adults and no one was harmed. And so I thought, okay, that's the rationale for this alliance. And can everyone see me? Because I see other faces. Okay, great. That was a little bit weird. And so, that's why I understood the purpose and I was glad to be a part of it. And I felt we were progressing. And then I guess around 2015, I became aware, or, someone had sent me a video, which had over 1 million views that said, is your sexual orientation transphobic, or are your genital preferences transphobic? And I thought, oh, of course that's absurd. And so I assumed I'm going to be watching this video and they're going to explain to me why that is not a transphobic thing to have a sexual orientation. To my shock and disappointment, that's not what the video was explaining. Instead, it was saying that to be same-sex or opposite-sex oriented was to be phobic and a genital fetishist, which is certainly, I think that we could ask questions whether sexual orientations are really about genitals, and that's a reasonable question. But the larger point was that I was really disturbed by the message of this idea that people's orientations could be wrong. And again, that this was falling under this umbrella that I understood was exactly the opposite of that. That was not its purpose. And around the same time, I think it was Deborah Messing, I don't normally know much about. She had some, cupcake. It was like a vagina cupcakes for a Women's International Day or something like that. And I thought, great. I'm not sure how I feel about those cupcakes or whatever, but I liked the idea. We're finally acknowledging that women have bodies and we can talk about them. And suddenly, she was faced with this torrent of abuse that was inappropriate to acknowledge that the existence of vaginas on a Women's International Day. And she was, she ended up apologizing for this. And so I started questioning, I guess this raised my attention to some of these conflicting issues. And then the Equality Act and its new revision followed on the heels of that. And then I read it and thought, this is absurd. This is really poorly thought through and it has all number of problems. And I thought, surely someone is going to start talking about it. And I waited. And I went to colleagues and said, have you read the Equality Act? And what do you think about that? And they said, no. And others said, don't go near that. And I waited a little bit longer. And then I realized it wasn't a hill that I want to die on because I'd prefer not to die on a hill. But it was something I was willing to talk about because I was waiting and this is horrible. And I felt really two different things. One is I felt that if people understood it, they wouldn't really be for it. And I still think that. And then I thought there was just really a lot of confusion around concepts that many people don't have the time or haven't had the ability to take classes or read the books that really distinguish between sex, gender, and the biology of sex and things like that. And at the same time, I was beginning to take courses in biology and genomics, and I was finally able to speak some facts to the kind of estimates from Fausto Sterling and others that have been criticized, but I didn't feel like I had the skills to really interpret them and understand that, how do I speak, knowledgeably about the idea that sex is binary. And so I felt like at that point I had, sex is binary with a few exceptions that don't make sex not real. And anyway, differences in sexual development are orthogonal to concerns about gender. And so I, spoke with some people who said, you're going to be attacked if you write this. And I said, that's okay. And I texted my family and they said, that's okay. And so, I thought about it, and then I came across really amazing work. Some of the people are on this chat. I got the book Feminist or Female Erasure that was kind of in the middle of this process, and then it somewhat unfolded. But so in this weird talk where I'm not normally presenting new research, and I don't know I don't want to repeat things I've already said, but I guess my key things I really have two things that I want to get across. And one is that my opposition to the Equality Act, and almost every feminist with whom I've had any conversations or read their work, is not about its aims. We all agree that the aims that everyone should have human rights to safety, employment, housing, and all these other things. And it's really the absolute horrible implication, the implementation of the act that's problematic. And we agree that the issue is the conflation of sex and gender and the explicit prioritization of gender identity over sex. And so I have some slides. I don't know if they're necessary. I could show them, but basically, if you read the text of the Equality Act, it wasn't an accident that they prioritized gender identity over sex. They did it purposely by saying, gender identity is something gender related. Of course, they don't define that, as Anne said, and it exists regardless of sex. And in the House debate over these issues, Republicans proposed, who I'm not normally in agreement with, but that's neither here nor there, proposed 2 amendments, one to leave sports sex separated for reasons that are obvious, that it's about biology, not gender, and those were rejected on a party line vote. And again, to have spaces that were purposely, exclusionary of the opposite sex to remain sex separated, and those 2 were rejected on a party line vote. And that really made me even more concerned, I think, because the discussions that we need to be having around these issues aren't being had. And that is the second main issue concern I have around these topics is the censorship and the attacking of people who raise reasonable questions about the reality of sex. The idea that we can't say sex is real and matters and without being called phobic or hateful is absurd. And it's democratically illegitimate, as some people have noted. And so, I think that I appreciate all I've ever seen support, and at the same time had complaints, from students to my deans that I'm, a hateful, transphobic person. But at the same time, I've had a number of discussions with people who are willing to engage in these things, these issues with reason and logic and fact. And I think that's what's missing. And what I appreciate about these groups and the feminist amendments and attempts to revise the Equality Act is this focus on logic and reason and our ability to speak the truth. And so, I guess, I think the 2 main points that hopefully come across in my paper and in my position is that I fully support human rights, but we absolutely cannot take rights from one vulnerable group, females, and give to another group, males, or any other person, that are purposely exclusionary of them because they're vulnerable, because we're vulnerable, and that's why we have those rights in the first place. And I think of, the women in prison that I visited, they're overcrowded. There's 6 women to a tiny cell. The toilets are in the middle of the room. There's absolutely no privacy. We have overcrowding prisons and jails. I think of I've visited drug rehabilitation centers where women are exceptionally vulnerable. In both places, women have really escalated rates of experiences with male abuse and sexual abuse in particular. I think of myself in middle school and how important my, even just the sex separated bathrooms were, and female only gym classes. And I think of how important it is that we are standing up for those women, for our earlier selves and the women that come before us, and recognize that it's not hateful to stand up for our rights, and that we can extend those same human rights to other people, including transgender people, but there's no human rights to opposite sex rights. And I don't know why this is difficult for people to understand, and I hope we can discuss it more here. But I think it really is this understanding that transgender people are opposite sex people trapped in a different body. And we can have different views of the issue, but sex is a biological material reality. So whatever you believe about that, one still has a sex. And so those are the rights that need to be protected, along with extending other rights to other people. And so I didn't want to talk too long, but briefly, would it be useful to just quickly share the language, or not so much of the text?
Yeah, actually, there was a request for those slides, so for sure.
Oh, great. Okay, so let's see if I can share my screen. It says host disabled screen sharing.
Oh, you want to share your screen?
May I?
Yes, if I can. Let me see.
You might have to drop me to be able to.
Oh, maybe. Oh, no. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know you were going to do that.
Oh,
Let
sorry.
me see. Share options. Host. Well, yeah, I'll have to just. Okay.
Yeah, you could drop me as a
You
co-host.
should be able to now,
Okay.
Callie.
Okay, great. Let's see if this works. Is it working?
No.
No. Well,
Your sound is kind of fading out to me, but
okay, well, what I'll do is I'll just post these in the chat, a little link to these, and it's really short. There's only 8 slides. But basically, it just talks about the flawed implementation, how it extends protections to 3 different groups by redefining sex to include these 2 terms, which we discussed.
Kelly,
And
can you adjust your sound a little bit? It's kind of fading out for me. I don't know if it is for anyone else.
is everyone else?
I can hear it just fine.
Okay, sorry
Okay.
about that. That it defines gender
Maybe it's just
circularly,
me.
as we discussed, without any requirement for formal status change, which means that any male at any time can self-ID into a women's space. So male rapist who is convicted of
There
rape.
it is.
Oh,
I was having some feedback here. Sorry
oh,
about
sorry
that.
about that. So a male rapist who is convicted of rape can say, I identify as a woman. We can all know he's insincere, and the Equality Act would require that he be treated in every way as if he were actually female, as currently written. I mean, that's not just absurd, it's profoundly sexist, and it really undermines the safety of women everywhere. And it does so by explicitly defining sex, again, to mean a sex stereotype includes pregnancy, childbirth, or other related medical conditions, and it defines sex as sexual orientation or gender identity, which it isn't. We all know that a female is not equal to a lesbian, which is not equal to a transgender person. In fact, those other 2 terms can't be defined without reference to sex. It defines gender, as we discussed, circularly. It uses gender 4 different times in the definition of gender identity, but it never defines it. So it's something that exists that's not sex, but it's gender related, but we don't know what that is. So that just allows anyone to use that in any way they want to for their purposes. It prohibits an individual. They added an explicit statement in the summary of the text more recently, which wasn't there before, to say that one of the goals of the bill is to prohibit an individual from being denied access to a shared facility, including a restroom, a locker room, and a dressing room that is in accordance with the individual's gender identity. And again, that was an amendment by the Republicans. They passed an amendment to change that language, and it was rejected. And as a result, it would eliminate women's sex-based rights and the right to exclude males. So places would essentially become unisex, but they would still be called sex separated. And the result is that really only predatory males, or as well as sincere trans women, would opt into these spaces. And I don't think anyone is going to reasonably argue for making spaces unisex. So hopefully we can make them aware of the fact that that's what this bill does. Sex continues to matter, and there's no human right to opposite sex provisions, which is what we're all here for. So in conclusion, and sorry you didn't get to see my slides, we must recognize sex in law as a biological reality. It is. Differences in sexual development do not undermine the reality of sex. People with those conditions absolutely deserve to be protected, but males and females still exist as a biological reality. We must retain the right to exclude based on sex when doing so as a proportionate means to a legitimate aim. And that includes spaces, events, competitions, and awards that Holly Lawford Smith, who's on here, has laid out really well. And we must continue to protect the rights of the LGBTQ alphabet, but in a different way, by creating new protected classes and new protected conditions, and not redefining sex to something it is not. Again, sorry these slides did not come up, but I'll post them, a link to them in the chat. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Callie. Appreciate you. And now we have M. Lynette Hartzell, a lesbian radical feminist. She's a retired attorney who practiced for 4 decades in North Carolina state and federal courts, representing and advising clients in workers' compensation, personal injury, consumer protection, child custody, civil disobedience, employment discrimination, and various other criminal and civil matters. Ms. Hartzell has also served as a mediator and arbitrator. She has been an active volunteer with her local Democratic Party, women's music and cultural organizations, and numerous other community organizations for decades. Welcome, Lynette.
Thanks. About a year ago, 2 lesbians, Bev Jackson residing in Holland and Kate Harris residing in the UK, recognized the need for an independent LGBT group that would speak up and challenge gender identity. Being creative lesbians, they used the free Twitter platform and launched LGBT Alliance UK. Today, they have over 32,000 followers from around the world. Being intelligent, ambitious lesbians, they realize the value and the potential of their well-received brand. Through their tireless efforts, LGBT Alliance UK have now spawned LGBT alliances across the globe, with LGBT alliances in Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Ireland, Spain, Norway, Iceland, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand, and now LGBT Alliance USA. Now, you might have guessed by now that I'm not a young internet geek. I, though, opened a Twitter account for LGBT Alliance in USA as a result of the very persuasive efforts of Bev Jackson. The plan was to post the guidelines for our group in 12 separate tweets in something called a thread. Although I've been a rabble-rouser on Twitter for some years, I had never posted a thread. But being an old attorney, used to being overly prepared, I researched, meaning I Googled, how to post a thread on Twitter. I copied my material to Word, and I was ready to go. But I think Bev sensed my lack of confidence, and so she called me on the phone and was on my speakerphone, excitedly encouraging, prodding me through the process. At the same time, LGBT Alliance UK tweeted our debut. When I began the thread, people from around the world and the United States began to follow us. Soon it was hundreds of followers and then 1,000. I witnessed a spontaneous combustion of celebration that finally the United States was standing up and speaking out for the LGBT community. Due to the diligent work of one of our members who now handles the Twitter feed, in less than a month, the LGBT Alliance USA has over 3,200 followers, and that number continues to increase. It was clear to me on that day that we were not alone, and that there was a hunger for leadership, for some group to stand up and speak up and simply say, sex, not gender. Let me just read part of the Twitter feed in the thread that launched our group, which states our guidelines. We are lesbians, gay men, bisexual men and women. We define ourselves in terms of same-sex sexual orientation, sex, not gender. Our group is led by lesbians, but we welcome gay men and bisexuals. We also welcome support from trans and straight people who endorse our aims. We assert the right of lesbians to define our own sexuality in terms of sex, not gender. We oppose the transitioning of children. We believe that the voices of detransitioners need to be heard. We believe that gender identity is the opposite of progressive. We condemn the abuse that is directed at J.K. Rowling and those who express similar views. We advocate a complete rethink of the way issues of sex and gender are approached in U.S. society today, especially in the liberal media and schools. It is time to reassert freedom of speech. We urgently need respectful, fact-based discussions of these matters throughout U.S. society. These are issues that affect all of us. So, as we clearly know, in this country today, people can be fired, demoted, shunned, threatened, and assaulted as a result of the mere utterance of forbidden words or expressing opinions contrary to a mandated script. It has become clear that unless we obey rules set by others, we will be smeared with the misogynist slur TERF. Just ask J.K. Rowling. Today, like the days of yesteryear, people are afraid to speak up, stand up, and protest because they can lose their jobs, their friends, their families. Groups cloaked as human rights and equality insist that we behave and sit down, be quiet, and accept the inevitable change that has already occurred. Our voices, objections, opinions about who we are and how we got here are silenced. We have been reduced to identities and forced to pledge allegiance to our pronouns. We no longer see LGBT. We no longer see lesbians. We no longer see the word woman. Our existence is determined by those within our liberal and LGBT community, not the radical right. So again, we return to our roots, lesbian, gay men, bisexuals, and our friends and allies standing as a broad coalition to assert our rights on the basis of sex. The Equality Act is a landmark piece of legislation, and the language in the act will be interpreted by various courts. Fist and Callie Bird have discussed the importance of amending the Equality Act to change the language in the act to protect lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals. LGBT Alliance USA and the Georgia Green Party, a feminist political party, stand in solidarity with Fist and have formed the Coalition for Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act, COFA. The Georgia Green Party endorsed the feminist amendments, and Hugh Esco, the secretary of the Georgia Green Party, and Denise Trena, the immediate past co-chair and the current treasurer of the state Green Party, worked with us on many facets of our current action. We invite other like-minded groups to join with us. Bring your members to stand with us for this cause, amendment of the Equality Act. Together, our voices will be amplified and our image enlarged. Our coalition is working together to deliver a message to Congress. In the next few days, we will mail a detailed letter supporting the feminist amendment of the Equality Act to every sitting senator, asking them to contact our representatives of our groups and talk to us, and to schedule a hearing on the Equality Act. Activism, as you know, flourishes within the bowels of the internet these days. So we need your help. Follow our Twitter account and follow Fist on Twitter. You may have noticed recently on Twitter the hashtags #AmendTheEqualityAct or #SexNotGender or #OnTheBasisOfSex attached to certain political statements regarding science. I encourage everyone on Twitter to tag every conversation that is appropriate with those hashtags so that they begin to trend on a daily basis. That can happen if we focus and act together. LGBT Alliance UK and other alliance groups and our allies across the globe will join us on Twitter and other platforms and magnify our presence and our goal. I encourage everyone to go to the FIST website, read the proposed amendments, and sign the endorsement page. We need to see an explosion of support for endorsing the amendments. Follow our Instagram account and spread the word. The young lesbian who manages our Instagram account reports that there is a lot of interest from women from as far away as Poland who want to connect and who are desperate to find safe communities for lesbians. You can join us on Facebook and keep up to date on the progress being made to bring this conversation to the front of the desk of every person in Congress. The graphic on our Facebook page was produced by one of our youngest members, who also produced the graphic for our Twitter feed and the logo for COFA. Our Facebook header depicts the images of many of our foremothers and fathers who were fighting for our rights as an LGBT community. So what you can do is call your senators. You don't have to wait. Tell them you need to have hearing on Equality Act. Tell them to contact representatives of the Coalition for Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act. Tell them to accept the feminist amendments to the Equality Act. Ask them if they've read the letter from the Coalition for Feminist Amendments to the Equality Act. Then email each senator and tell them the same thing. Then text or call or email all of your friends who are willing to stand with us and ask them to do the same thing. Then call back every few days and ask if they've received the letter and ask them if the hearing is scheduled you want to watch. It's a phone call, an email, and feel free to send a letter. If you're on our activist list, we will alert you when our letter to Congress is dropped, and you can then follow up with a phone call and an email or a letter to your senators asking them to approve the feminist amendments to the Equality Act. The coalition will also email the letter to all senators. You can get an alert when the email drop goes out so that you too can email your senators immediately and frequently asking them if they've received a letter from the coalition to amend the Equality Act. Rest assured that this is but the first action of this group. We are determined to develop a persistent call on the new Congress to address this matter, and a call on our own culture to listen to our message, sex, not gender. You can be part of this history. Volunteer to work with the coalition. Contact us through Twitter or Facebook or at the emails posted in the chat. If you know people who can help us accomplish this goal, let us know. Everyone can contribute something that will make a difference. There are, of course, costs associated with this endeavor, so if you can contribute money to the cause, visit the FIST website where you can make a donation. I'm certain that by working together, lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, and our allies can change the world again. If we speak up and stand up for our rights, sex, not gender, we can become a force to be reckoned with. The Twitter feed for LGBT Alliance Ireland went live just a few weeks ago, and they now have 2,700 followers. They were immediately attacked in a news article as being transphobic, and they immediately responded with their own article. There are 2 sentences from that article that I think capture the essence of what we've all been working for and hope to accomplish. They began that article with this sentence: "We are writing this to ask a simple question. Why is it so awful to come together to advocate for our rights as same-sex attracted people?" The article is short, but it ends with this sentence, which also I think is significant. "We hope Irish people can see our mission to support the LGBT community is not a nefarious plot to ruin trans people's lives, but a protective bid to save ourselves." Please know that although I'm the face you see today, we at LGBT Alliance USA have many younger lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals. I'm just the one who can't be fired from retirement. Our young members are involved, dedicated, and carrying this cause forward for all of us. It has been my pleasure and honor to work with such an intelligent, caring group. These young folks have exhibited enormous patience and have extended every courtesy to those of us who may not be familiar with a lot of the new internet applications and terminology employed in organizing on social media platforms. We at LGBT Alliance USA are grateful for all of the patience, encouragement, and assistance we have received from Kate and Bev. LGBT Alliance USA is here because they had the courage to step up and speak out for all of us. So don't be afraid. Step up no matter your age or how small your contribution, and join us. Together, we will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. That was awesome. All right, so we have questions, and I want to encourage folks to continue sending their questions in. I have one that's on screen right now, so I halted my scroll so that I wouldn't miss this one. So I want to start with questions if everybody's ready for questions. So this one is, I would like to ask the writers of the amendments to define the term transgender people that is used throughout the document. There are some in the feminist community who worry that using that term repeatedly in the document lends validity to the idea that one can be born in the wrong body and might need invasive surgeries and hormones or access to women's spaces in order to be okay. We don't want to protect that as any sort of right. So anyone that wants to...
I can start and read the definition of transgender that's in the feminist amendments. Transgender is a term adopted by a subset of people who do not conform to sex stereotypes commonly associated with their biological sex, and who may hold a deeply personal sense of identity that conflicts with or denies their biological sex. So basically they're saying, this says that transgender people are a subset of people who are non-conforming to the sex stereotypes assigned to them based on their sex, and they have a belief system that alienates them from their bodies. It's that belief system says that there is such a thing as being born in the wrong body. We do not adopt that belief system in any way. We're merely recognizing people have that belief system. They're not protected as people with this belief system. They're protected because of their non-conformity to sex stereotypes. They're protected in the same way as a butch lesbian be protected, or any woman who decides she doesn't want to wear makeup and heels at work and she gets in trouble and may be fired because she's not dressed right, or her personality is too pushy or aggressive. Any of that stuff is the same type of protection. People should be able to at work dress as they like, express themselves as they like. What the problem is the infringement on women's rights or the imposition of these ideas on other people. So a person can believe whatever they want. I mean, people believe all kinds of things that I don't agree with. People, believe there's going to be a rapture and that I'm going to go to hell because I don't believe in Jesus. I mean, there's a lot of people have that beliefs. They can believe whatever they want. And I have coworkers that believe all kinds of things, but they have no right to impose those beliefs on others. That's the problem. If a person wants to believe they were born in the wrong body, I disagree with that, but believe what you want. But don't make me acknowledge that belief by having to use certain pronouns or to reinforce your belief system. And that's really what the problem is. So in the Feminist Amendments, we get rid of the whole misgendering stuff. We basically say it is perfectly okay. It's not discrimination to recognize a person's sex. That's okay. So we're really going away from that whole idea and protecting people so that we can have our own beliefs. You can believe what you want. That's unfortunate you believe that. I'd like to change your mind, but believe what you want. But don't make me believe it. Don't make me salute the flag and have to put my pronouns on my signature line at work and all this other business. And to consider if I use a pronoun that is a sex-based pronoun, that I'm discriminating against somebody. So it very specifically protects that. It basically renders transgender ideology. It's the ideology that's harmful. It basically renders it harmless by all the specific provisions in the amendments.
I think I just want to say that I think that what we did in terms of defining sex, in terms of providing explicitly for female-only spaces, means that the fact that we mention transgender and especially defining it the way we do, it doesn't give any power to that word as such. I really don't see how there's any power to the word transgender the way that we define it. And I think somebody else was asking what is it going too far taking gender identity out of the act, which is what we proposed, to take it out and just say sex stereotyping. And that was pretty much the balance that we were having to weigh, because we do think that people, I see it certainly, that people who are transgender, they are gender non-conforming people. They're not conforming to the stereotypes for their sex. And I do think that they are people who deserve to be protected against discrimination on that basis. So, that was pretty much the line that we had to walk. There are going to be some people who think that we erred in one direction or the other, but these are the choices we made that we feel that we can defend as feminists. And, people may agree or disagree with how we drew those lines. But it's our stance that transgender people should be protected against discrimination, but not give weight to the existence of a gender identity as a legal category.
Could I add to that as well?
Sure.
Yeah, I want to say, I think that's a really great question to consider. But I also think that it's essential in part because we're fighting an uphill battle right now. So we're in a place where to simply say sex is real and matters is somehow deemed phobic. So we can't make the perfect the enemy of protecting sex-based rights. And so I think that some compromises are going to have to be made. And I also agree that there are circumstances where someone who identifies as transgender is vulnerable. Prisons are one of them. And we can strategize about ways to protect people on the basis of vulnerabilities, however they choose to call them and whatever they may think of them, while still maintaining our rights and safety and psychological well-being. So I think that there is a danger in us, trying to say, well, we don't believe in this belief, for people to say, I don't believe that trans exists because gender is a social construct, or, that argument that we're not going to get very far if we take hard lines that aren't reasonably negotiable within the context in which we find ourselves.
Awesome. All right. I have a couple of questions that sort of flow into each other, so I'm going to read them concurrently. So are there any elected politicians who have indicated a willingness to consider the problems within the Equality Act? And many from the conservative right have tried to partner with our movement. I don't see the benefit in aligning with women who have historically and as of present work against women, despite them also facing oppression on the basis of sex. Some women believe they should be included. What do the women here think? Does unity mean all women, even if those women aren't with us? Meaning conservative or so those the initial question is, are there individuals, politicians that are indicated willingness to work with us? And also, how does that work, working with the conservative forces?
You want to, I don't have a, we're at the beginning of this process, so I'm not sure if we identified any particular senators or congressmen yet, congresspeople yet. So I don't know if Lynette or anybody else has anything to say
In
on
fact,
that.
we're just sending out the letters to them this week, right?
Right. So I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that question. I can't answer that yet. I think we're hitting everybody and we're going to see what sticks, and we're going to push everybody we can.
Yeah,
I can
we
answer-
should tell everyone that we have the alliance, the coalition, I mean, for feminist amendments has developed a package that we're sending to all the people in the Senate. Correct?
Right.
Yes.
Within a few
And
days.
that is close to being ready to send out. Is it not?
In the next few
Yeah.
days, yes.
Yeah, we were working on it. It's just about complete. I think the idea is to send the information to everybody in the Senate, the current Senate as it stands, and that may change hopefully for the better or worse, depending on where you're standing. And I think part of what we're looking at is to start the conversation, because we also understand, I believe, that this is going to be sent back to the House with the new Congress that's sworn in January 3rd. And so it may start again back in the House. And the idea is to start the conversation in the Senate. We may or may not in this lame duck session get a hearing, but it certainly starts the conversation pushing forward for senators to at least consider and to know that people want this information and want a hearing. So it's if you can make these phone calls and emails and follow up on these things, it raises the visibility of the issue. And that is the point of sending out the mail and the emails and part of the action. Something everybody can do, takes a minute of your time. So that's one of the reasons for doing this, is to see what sticks.
And to that, I would add that I've spoken recently with 3 at various levels in the state of Georgia, and one representative in the House who was a sponsor of the Equality Act, and I explained to him, you know, in very short and simple language what it would do, and he said, "I see the problems," and you know, I don't know how much of this was just appeasing me, but he said, but you know, there's a long way till that bill would ever be passed, you know, by both houses, and we have a chance to get it right. So he at least acknowledged in some way that it was problematic in its current form. And I think the more we reach out, the more obvious these things are. Even saying basic things like a male convicted rapist can self-ID into the women's prison, and there's nothing we can do about it. No one can present that and think, that's good, let's go forth with this.
I think one of the things that that's important too is that we really raise awareness, and we have to educate the legislators, because the fact of the matter is, and most of the general public really, they don't understand the problems, they don't understand the issues. So part of this is going to be, one of the things we're going to do with the letter is to send a fact sheet in attached to it also. I really think a lot of people in Congress simply don't get it and don't understand this. And that's why it's really necessary to have hearings again on this issue, and I don't know how to, I'm a trial lawyer, so, you know, my tactic is, I think we just have to scare the hell out of them. And that's the most effective way to do this. And until you scare the hell out of them, we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to get all the scare the hell out of them information we can together. So send it to us and we'll send it to them. And that's how you can participate. And that's not making things up. That's just getting the truth to the people who are going to make decisions that will affect all of our lives. Mine less so, because I'm old, but for the younger generation, it's going to have a tremendous impact. So really get all the information you can to us and or to the senators for them to make these decisions. They're really important.
I just wanted to respond to the issue, but it wasn't completely clear what the question was about the right, but um, Feminists in Struggle has, one of our principles is to not make alliances with the religious right or the white supremacist right. We think it harms the movement more than helps it grow. The other thing is, it's the issues that you fight around. Now, we think it's really important that we take a position on the Equality Act that urges it be amended and that the good things be maintained. And I don't think any strong follower of the Christian right, certainly as organizations, are going to support something that puts LGBT rights into the federal statute, or are they going to support something that that closes the hole of religious exemptions to the civil rights laws? So those are two things that they're not likely to support. And so what I think is one of the dangers of making alliances with far-right organizations is that we weaken our message and in order to have them along as part of a coalition. And I think that would be a mistake. I think that we build a women's movement. We've got two enemies that we have to recognize as feminists, one of them being trans ideology, and the other being the Christian right or the religious right, which is attacking abortion and being anti-equal rights amendment, things like that. So we have basically feminism is a whole struggle. If we coincide with somebody who's on the right, we need to keep our message independent and our money independent. That's the key thing. So and I think also in a situation of a Congress, if anybody gives us a hearing at a Congress, I wouldn't be against that. I don't think anybody with this would be against doing that. But we don't want to change our politics or muddle our message in order to appease anybody on the right. And I think that's really kind of the point for us, for FIST anyway.
Awesome. So the next question, and I just want to say too, because we have so much, there's 144 messages in the queue that I haven't even seen yet. So if you have a question, if you can type out question first. So some people have done that, and that makes it really easy to spot where we have questions versus commentary, and then post your question. That would be fantastic. But the next one I have is, how does the amendment affect how does the equality, I'm sorry, I put this down. I should have just taken it from the thing. But how does the Equality Act affect the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment?
How would it? Yeah.
Well, actually, the Equal Rights Amendment would help because it's about sex. It says equal rights under the law will not be denied or abridged on account of sex. We're concerned about, and it does, another part of the ERA says that the Congress will make laws about it for implementation. How they define sex, of course, is important. And we need to, maintain that sex be defined as sex and not be submerged into gender identity. But I think actually the Equal Rights Amendment would be a great boon for our fight to defend and advocate for the rights of women and girls based on sex and to end discrimination based on sex. So I think it would be a good thing. But of course, there's this danger. I know that when I was involved in presenting to the Green Party on the Equal Rights Amendment, there was quite a bit of hostility by some of the trans activists in the Green Party who didn't feel that the ERA was inclusive, which is a sign that the ERA is a good thing. So, but I do think the ERA is a really important piece of what we have to fight for. And we've gotten all the states that we need ratified. It now needs to be registered as in the Constitution. It would be a helpful thing for us, but we will still have to defend and define sex as sex. We'll have to make sure that definition is not eroded.
And yeah, normally it would have already been recorded in the Constitution, but the Trump administration, as well as I believe it's the Alabama GA that filed suits to prevent it from being recorded Is that not true? To prevent the archivist from recording it.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know there's an issue about getting it recorded, and that's the
Yeah,
main
yeah.
aspect.
So anyway, but I think the question though, Anne, just to clarify, I think what they're asking is, what would the Equality Act, how would that affect
It could be
things?
negative, yeah. The way it is now, it could have a negative impact because it could redefine sex, and that's a danger. So because the Equal Rights Amendment puts sex in the Constitution, and then it says that Congress can interpret, Congress can enact laws to implement it. If they start withering away at the definition of sex, so it no longer means sex, it means gender identity, or gender identity supplants sex, that is a danger. There's no question that it could undermine it, but having the ERA in there was way good thing to have.
And it'd be a lot better if we got the ERA actually signed into the Constitution, recorded before any Equality Act gets passed. I would think. Correct?
It's hard to, it should get, the sooner it gets in there, the better. There's no question about
Right.
that. And it would be
Yeah.
good to have sex in there, just the word sex, and having that in the Constitution is that we'd have so many hooks and so many things that we could do with that. But there is that danger, it'll still remain as long as sex is being redefined and supplanted by gender identity.
Right.
So we have to defeat that as well.
All right, I have the question, do the feminist amendments distinguish between transgender and gender nonconforming? Is there a distinguishment
Tina, do you want to
made?
answer it, or do you want me to answer it?
Well, I think as you said, and I said, it's a subset. Transgender people are a subset of gender nonconforming people.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question. Would it be better to reframe the language surrounding transgender people to reflect language surrounding religious people?
I'm not sure what that means. We basically say that we don't use religious, but when we describe a religious group such as Jehovah's Witnesses, we say they're Jehovah's Witnesses. That doesn't mean we believe that they really are witnesses of God. It just, that's what they call themselves. So whether we should include, the rights to have a belief system, I'm not sure what the question is. If somebody wants to write in the chat, maybe explain.
Yeah, and if you want to put a little bit more to that question, we'll get double back to it. So the next question is, are there any plans to try to work with the trans or detrans groups or individuals such as GCCAN or Buck Angel who have publicly supported sex-based rights for women and trans people?
I think the coalition's position, I believe, that we're a new group, would be that anyone who supports the feminist amendments would be welcome. So I think that would probably be our position. I mean, that would be what I would want, is that we're building a coalition here based on everyone who supports the feminist amendments and wants to advocate for the feminist amendments.
And also, just to add, the LGBT Alliance USA and LGBT Alliance, in part of our guidelines is that detransitioners' voices should be heard. So we do support that, and we would welcome them to be part of our group. And we hope that more people, more detransitioners will come to our group and be part of it. So we welcome that.
And just speaking for myself, I would also say, if we're supporting the rights of transgender people to be protected against discrimination as a subset of gender nonconforming people, then that transgender people who want to join us would be welcome, as their rights are part of who's being protected as well. If they are supporting women's sex-based rights, I think that would also be a good thing.
All right, the next question, regardless of the Equality Act, women and girls stand to lose their sex-based rights under Title IX by Biden's ability to act alone. Is there any plan in place to address that? Executive orders.
Not yet. I mean, but we definitely, I think we would want to approach the Biden administration about a lot of stuff. But right now we're focused on, we're doing a campaign on one big issue. We have problems in every state right now, or a lot of states. We have really bad laws in California that need to be challenged. But we see this as a way of building a movement to challenge all of it. It's focusing on, a big national issue, but it's really all connected. And as we build and unite and educate the population, then we could have an impact on defeating this ideology that would erase women's rights.
Yeah, I think also that's part of the reason for doing this mail drop on the Senate. That doesn't go unnoticed. And, I believe that somebody by the name of Harris is the VP now, is a senator still. And I think, it's going to draw some attention to the Biden camp. And I think, we're also going to try to make inroads. And this is what I said. So if people know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody within any of the administration, that's how this work gets done. And that is, a lot of the contact goes through the lower personnel in the senator's office, and the same thing with Biden. It's somehow getting into the inner circle, whether it's through, his wife, Jill Biden. Dr. Biden is an educator. I would think she would have some interest in this. So I think there are a lot of inroads that can be made. That's the reason we're starting this push, is to raise awareness and to try to educate everybody. We're not narrowing it down. So hopefully we can get through to somebody at some point in time. It's an uphill climb. I think Callie Burt said that earlier.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that. I think that in agreement with what everyone said, this education about what all of this means and what this implies doesn't just have relevance to the Equality Act, but to things that other people are thinking of too. And I think as part of that, we've seen this knee-jerk progressivism. I can't remember whose term that was, but I love it. That people that were against, gay marriage or were concerned about same-sex rights, and then have, since changed their minds and now think that they don't want to be on that wrong side again. And that's what anything that is anti, sex equals gender represents to them. And so I think that educating them that what, for example, the HRC puts out doesn't represent all of us. And countering that with organized movement and more voices will be extraordinarily influential and important. And everyone can't speak. They're not in a position to, but those who can, just talking about it will be useful.
Excellent. So, and then the next question did talk about California's passage of SB 132, which you just mentioned, Anne, as well, that there are things happening all over, that this is the primary thing that we're focusing on right now. So do we have anything in the works for California?
Do we have what in California?
FIST has took a position against 132, and we were actually quoted in the San Francisco Chronicle on the bottom of the article, one little line, lost in a very biased article. But we did at least get attention and get interviewed. So we are concerned about what happens around the country. But what we need more people. We need more activists. We need to build a movement so we can take on more of this all over the country.
Add to that too. So I have a few connections that are just fairly random with people who had served on the board previously that determined where people were housed. And she had said that before SB 132, it really turned on genitals. So if trans women had surgery, then they would be allowed in the women's prison. If not, they would be put in the men's. And I think the issue that was really difficult for those who were informed about this was that we had research on all the trials and tribulations of trans women in men's prison, but we didn't have any research about what women think of it. And so I've been trying to work with colleagues to get a Justice Department grant to get in women's prisons so we can interview them and learn more about their experiences and how this will affect them psychologically. And because I think, just saying, look how harmed they are, and we're ignoring the fact how harmed women would be and how harmed many have been who are in prison right now. And so we need more evidence to counter this narrative that trans women are the only ones vulnerable, and so we should just let them come into female spaces.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So the next question is it's sort of a I have two things that came through, and it's interesting because I didn't know this. So the one question is I'm confused about the similarity and difference between the Equality Act and the proposed Equal Rights Amendment. I see them as having a common philosophical undermining. Is that
Just
correct?
froze.
Underpinning.
I froze? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you, I think, Anne.
Carol, do you know what she's talking?
Um,
Is everybody else frozen or
Well,
no? No.
yeah, the
I
Equal
actually
Rights
think
Amendment
the
is
question-
is a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It would amend, change the actual federal constitution under which all the laws are, subject to. So, and that's completely different. The Equality Act is just a legislation that's being considered in the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate.
What was the
US
question that was being?
Hugh
What the
Stack on that
difference was,
question.
I think, but go ahead, Hugh.
Yeah, Melissa Farley asked this question, and she wasn't asking about the Equal Rights Amendment. She was talking about the Equality Amendment, which apparently has been drafted by Catherine McKinnon
Oh, yes.
and Kimberly Crenshaw. And that's a document I have not read. If anyone here has, I would love to hear, to learn what we can learn here on this call. But Ms. Farley, Dr. Farley posted a link in our chat to an article interviewing Catherine McKinnon on it that I hope to read after this event. Over.
But it's based on gender identity, is it not?
I suspect so. Dr. Farley's saying that she opposes it. Melissa, do you want to unmute yourself and chime in here and clarify? Am I misspeaking for you?
Both the equality, I don't know enough. That's why I was hoping somebody on the panel would. I'm confused. I'm genuinely confused about the similarities and differences between the proposed Equality Act and the proposed Equality Amendment to the Constitution. I have the impression that they have similar philosophical gender identity underpinnings, but I'm not sure. Do any of you know?
That's true.
That's a very concerning. I hadn't heard of that. And definitely, I know there are people who want to change that, don't like the ERA because it says sex and they wanted to change it, but I didn't know it had gotten there. Actually, is a proposal to amend the Constitution. That's really scary.
And as I
Yeah,
understand, it is also intended to add race. It's intended from a perspective of being intersectional, not, and I don't want to say more.
Hello,
because as far as I understood, when I read that article by McKinnon and Crenshaw, it was intended to bring what they considered to be an intersectional feminist approach, which would be including race as well as sex and some other factors. I think they include gender identity. We know that professors do support gender identity, but it was not the same as the Equality Act in the sense of being a law that was particularly coming from a desire to advance gender identity. As far as I understood, it really comes from a different place, although it may include some of that perspective. That's not the focus of that proposal by two law professors. It has not been introduced as any legislation. And I think we need to focus on what we actually are working with. So I support what I believe someone from FIST was saying in the chat, that we should work on getting the actual original Equal Rights Amendment based on sex incorporated into the Constitution.
Yes, that was me. And if I can interject here, Tina, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, you know, the the whole amendment process, in case people aren't familiar with that, you know, is a very long, arduous process where, you know, legislation gets passed in the U.S. Congress, and then it has to go to all the states in order to be ratified by at least 38 of them. And that process would, you know, takes quite a while usually. It depends, you know, in the case of the Equal Rights Amendment, the original one, it's taken what, over like almost 50 years since it was first introduced. So, so any kind of amendment that would be proposed would have to go through that kind of process. The Equal Rights Amendment, the original one that is based on sex, has already gone through that whole process and has been ratified by the required number of states. All it needs now is to be recorded by the archivist, and that's what's being fought by the Trump administration. And I believe it's the GA, and I think it's Mississippi or Alabama, maybe Alabama. But so, you know, we're like within a hair's breadth of getting that passed. The other one would take very long time to get, you know, to get that even considered. Have to go through that whole thing, the whole process.
Josh, are you back? Are you okay now? You were frozen.
Me? I'm good.
Okay,
Good.
good. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead then, Joss.
All right. So, and I apologize to Dr. Farley. I had not heard of the Equality Amendment, so I just read it as the Equal Rights Amendment, and that's
Right.
my mistake. Apologies. The next question is, how did I get involved with LGBT Alliance USA? And that was Bev and Kate posted on LGBT Alliance UK about starting up an USA affiliation, and I responded to them and got involved in the process there. So, and I think the underlying theme we have here is just get involved. You know, jump in and do whatever you can. We all have to do all that we can for LGBT rights and women's rights. The next question is, and this is actually a statement that Equal Rights Amendment activists are defining sex as gender, which is something I also was not aware of. You're a
That's not
activist.
necessarily the case. Yeah, I don't think that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I don't think it is the case. We had a couple of people from the people who've been leading up the struggle for the Equal Rights Amendment, and they're saying sex. So they're not necessarily as attuned to this whole controversy, but they are talking about sex. But I just got a little text from somebody who said that the new equality amendments would include gender identity. So that means there would be some problems there, obviously.
Okay. The next question is, why isn't the WHRC US supporting the feminist amendment? And I'm not sure that they aren't. Are they not? I know that our groups sort of were forming concurrently, so I don't know.
There's a few people who are in a interim body that I think at least one of the people does support it. There's a very small body and the others do not. I can't speak to them why. It'd be not great if the movement needs to unite. So I don't know, but I can't really speak for them about why that would be.
Stuck on that question. Yeah, Thistle Pedersen and Carrie Bruss, who are both serving on the interim steering committee, I think they call it, for WHRC US, are, or at least at one time were on this call. Perhaps either of them can be recognized and asked to unmute and speak to that question.
Carrie, are you there?
But Thistle.
Or Thistle, are you there?
Hey, I'm here. The interim steering committee of the WHRC USA is not taking a position on the feminist amendments, but we have like thousands of signatories, including many FIST members and LGBT Alliance members to the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. And so I have signed on as an individual, but not from WHRC USA ISC, which is the interim steering committee. So that's all I have to say. I mean, you can sign the declaration and you can sign on to the Coalition for the Feminist Amendments. But this body called the ISC, the interim steering committee, at this point, that body is not taking a stand.
Okay, thank you, Thistle. So this question, oh, I'm sorry,
Well,
anybody? Go ahead.
They're working on, just to interject for a second, I think they're working on a pretty similar one, are they not, Thistle? Are you not?
I don't really, it's in process. I'm not sure about that. There's been work on rewriting the Equality Act amongst, our ranks, but it's in process.
Yeah, but the whole the basic idea is the same. They want to protect women's sex-based rights. So correct.
Oh for sure, for sure. That's why I've signed on. Like I said, I've signed on as an individual. I believe that we have more common ground than we have, disagreement. But that's my opinion as an individual and not as a member of the WHRC USA ISC.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Thistle.
So this next question goes to Callie. Callie, academics is the belly of the beast. Do you have any strategy getting through to people? Do you think academic freedom is the right framework?
Yes, I mean, absolutely, it is the right framework with obvious limitations, in certain things that I think that we have negotiated well for the last 100 years until this recent move towards extreme censorship in certain particular areas. So I found both that a lot of people aren't willing to talk about it, but simultaneously I found that the undergrads that I teach, they are really interested in these issues. The first time I taught about sex and gender and the difference between the two, and it was in a sociology of deviance course, so it wasn't precise, I just wanted to get this information in there. But many said that it was their favorite part of the course, that they didn't understand that there were different types of feminisms, that they didn't understand the distinction between sex and gender, and they were really open to it. And I think, I open it with, we may all misspeak, we're doing our best, but let's just try to talk about these issues and understand that we're all trying to be respectful. And that seemed to go really well. And that was when I was at University of Washington, where at a place I wouldn't have expected quite so much openness. I think within like the faculty ranks, I think it's a little more difficult. I think people with tenure are much more well positioned. At the same time, grad students, especially with the increased unions, which I support, but they are very well organized. And I had to go to numerous meetings to deal with complaints about something that was far before I even wrote this paper, about something that was totally not even at all questionable in terms of position on trans issues. And so I think that it is going to be difficult. And I think the more people that we get that they're saying things like sex is real, we need not give up sex-based rights to protect LGBTQ plus people, the more it becomes easier for everyone to discuss these things and it be acceptable. I don't apologize. I'm not going to back down. I'm not, I'm going to say these things, and I'm going to have respectful discussions with anyone who will engage with me. And I think the more we can normalize that, and obviously J.K. Rowling took enormous steps in that regard and got enormous negative feedback for that, then the more it becomes okay, and the less that they can paint simple statements about reality and valid concerns that need discussion as phobic and hateful. So I hope that more people in academia are speaking out. I get private messages, and increasingly more, some people will say things publicly in support.
Thank you, Callie. So our next question is, in light of Biden's statements about, quote, fixing all of Trump's positions, end quote, by decree, would all of our letters that we're copying also go to the White House, to Biden and Harris? I think we sort of talked about this with Harris previously, but yeah, are we also addressing everything to Biden and Harris?
Well, I don't think it hurts, to raise the awareness there, and I think it's a good thing. And certainly, people should be calling Vice President-elect Harris, and I think the First Lady, Dr. Biden. I think these are inroads that can be made, and I think they at least have to give us some lip service. And I think if we push hard enough, I don't know if they will actually take it seriously, or if somebody in their organization, one of the staff people will perhaps read the mail, perhaps read the package, perhaps pass it on. The only thing you can do is just keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And eventually, it's that squeaky wheel kind of thing. So I suggest, sure, send it. Why not? Test the mail system. I understand it's working wonderfully now.
I'm just going to break in to say we've got 10 minutes before the 3 o'clock hour. So we need to probably be closing.
All right. Look, so a couple more questions then.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit backlogged on these questions, but let's hit this one. Can Biden get the ERA certified by executive order? Is that possible?
No, it has to be. I don't believe so. Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't believe so.
We know people who do, probably, who were at our last forum, but I'm not enough of an expert to know that.
Okay.
But certainly support would make a big difference. I mean, it would be a big difference.
None of the attorneys, Tina and Lynette?
I don't know is the short answer. And, a lot can be done with executive orders. I don't know that something of this magnitude would be covered in an executive order. I don't know if he would do it or not. But, if he can't get anything passed in the Senate, then he may be up against a wall and try to do something to save face and to look like he's doing something. So the short answer is, I don't know.
We're talking about the Equal Rights Amendment, though, correct?
Yeah, the ERA.
Yeah, the Equal Rights Amendment.
He can't. Yeah.
There are currently lawsuits, filed, so those would have to be resolved, would they not?
Technically, yes.
Okay, this is I think this is an important question, and one that a lot of us struggle with. So I'm interested to hear your answers. What's the most effective way to bring along friends who do want equality but don't understand how fighting for trans rights in its current popular iteration can actually result in infringing and undermining female rights?
I think that it's not a soundbite kind of thing. It takes a real conversation, and the real unfortunate thing is that so many conversations have been shut down, or people are afraid to speak because of the ramifications of speaking up on this topic. But I think when you have a conversation, when you can get facts, when you can explain, specifically how this impacts women as a sex and why sex is important, that we can't override it. I think you can get somewhere. I mean, I got somewhere even with my a little conversation with my person in the HR department at work, who's a gay man, and he says, "Well, yeah, I could get that. I wouldn't want to, have sex with a trans man, So I mean, so he kind of got some of what I said as a lesbian, that I was concerned a lesbian is about sex, and I didn't like the eroding of sex because that was really negative. That would be bad for lesbians. We would be really defined out of existence. And he I kind of get that. So sometimes you can get through to people. The problem is that the debate has been silenced, because if we could have a debate, we would win. That's the thing. So the most important thing is to be able to build enough of a movement, enough support from each other, enough solidarity with each other, that we can speak out, we can openly organize, and that's the way I think we can win this debate.
And to add to that, I would say that one of the things that there are two ways that when I try to talk with people about some of these issues is raising the issue that we aren't a society that operates on the basis of self-ID in general. So this brings up, there's the other issue besides self-ID, but you can't self-ID to buy alcohol. You can't self-ID to park in a disabled parking spot. You can't self-ID to vote. All these basic things you can't self-identify into. And so I think, when you raise that, why would you think that this would work? And then they kind of think about, well, you're right, that probably would work. Okay, but then how do you protect trans people? And then you say, okay, then let's move on to, why do you think that they have to be treated as female to be protected, because that's not what we did to get marriage equality. We didn't say, okay, one lesbian partner is going to have to identify as a husband and then we're going to get married. Instead, we just extended rights to people as they are without redefining categories. And so I think when we can like break down these pieces and kind of ask them to think about the way we do things and why you think this is the right way to do things, even though it's going to be particularly problematic, then I found people kind of like, oh, you're right. We're not trying to not protect other groups. We're trying to do it in a way that keeps everyone's well-being, safe.
All right, and Tina, did you want to add to that? Okay, all right, and then because we are running short on time, so I want to circle back to this question as this is a clarification of the religious question from earlier. The clarification is you don't call out specific religious people when you protect religious people. You would say Jehovah's Witnesses, but wouldn't write a whole law saying Jehovah's Witnesses have protection under the law. It's more generic than that, people who hold religious beliefs. So I don't recall what the original question was for that, but that was a clarification.
Yeah, well, politics is very specific. In this situation, we're trying to say that that we support everyone's basic human rights, and the issue of people who identify as transgender is obviously there. If we ignore it, it won't go away. We have to define it define it in such a way and limit it in such a way that it does not encroach on sex-based rights. So I think not mentioning it is going to make it more dangerous, not less. That's in terms of women's rights. I also think that there's the one thread of legitimacy in the whole ideology, which is so reactionary in my opinion and sexist. The one thread of legitimacy is a right of people to dress and express themselves and as they wish, as J.K. Rowling said. And I think it's important that we say that explicitly in a way to win the most people over without in any way compromising the sex-based rights that we spelled out black and white. It was clear as day in the feminist amendments.
All right, I have, I think, 2 more questions we can get to for right now. So the first one is, now gender self-ID ideology asserts that a trans person is anyone who claims to be trans, regardless as to whether she or he is gender non-conforming or not. Is this a concern vis-a-vis the EA and feminist amendments?
I think in the feminist amendments, we include people who have an identity. If there's any way that they're being discriminated against for having an identity, like let's say you go into work and say, I have such and such identity, and your boss says, I don't like you for that, you're fired, you're protected against that. Even if, say, you're a man and you just look like any other man, and nobody would ever think you're gender nonconforming. I don't think there's a problem with that. You don't get, it doesn't mean that anybody else has to say, yes, you are what you identify as. And that's exactly what we say in the feminist amendments. No, we're not identifying, the pronouns thing is not what we're going to require people to do.
All right, and so since we're right on at time, and I want to say too, like we moved the whole first section really in just a really great pace, and all of this has gone very well time-wise. So I'm going to leave this one, and there are really great questions that we're not going to get to tonight. But the last question is, when are we meeting again?
We
Well,
should probably do a follow-up on this.
Yeah, I think the most important thing people can do is to get involved, to endorse the feminist amendments on the feminist website, Feminist and Struggle website, feministstruggle.org, to endorse the feminist amendments. We have people's email addresses. Get involved. Join the coalition. We're going to have meetings. We don't want to just be a talk shop, although it's great to have these discussions and we should keep having them. But we want to be able to take action. We want to be able to move this campaign forward, and we need more people. Actually getting involved. It's the time now is to start taking action. We've had lots and lots of discussions, and we're going to keep having them, but I think we need to take that the next step, and we need to encourage people to join. FIST welcomes members. The coalition welcomes everyone who supports the feminist amendments to join us and get involved. We need the people power, the women and male allies power to push this forward, to stop a very reactionary and sexist ideology from taking over everything, and being able to push back and assert our rights as a sex. So we need you to be involved. But yeah, we have FIST has had since the lockdown, since COVID, we have had regular events, and we will invite you to the next one that we have on various topics that concern feminism, not just gender identity, but including that. And this campaign and this coalition will continue. And right now we're brand new. We got our letter almost ready to go to hit the Senate, and we'll be taking it from there. We need more people power on the ground to help us.
Hugh Stack.
Hey, Hugh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll put this question to Anne and Lynette. Are we ready to now publish the public email address that was tested this past week?
Oh, sure.
I think so, yeah, go ahead.
So it's info at sexbasedrights.org. We purchased that domain just a few days ago, and everyone here is urged to replicate our test and ensure that it works. But yeah, we successfully tested that a couple days ago. So both Anne and Lynette will be receiving email at info@sexbasedrights.org.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, thank you,
Let
everybody.
everyone know that, a couple of us, men can stay on, for a little bit, I think, can't we, Ann, to help people if they want to do a little networking on here.
Well, thanks.
If I could answer a question from Penelope Harris, we have not put up a website yet at that domain, but we have activated email. But I suspect that in future meetings, we'll soon be talking about putting a website up at that address. I hope.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Okay. Great job, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Appreciate all
Josh.
of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Most of all, good luck.
Thank you.
Mashallah.
Thank you.
Ross, are you still there?